One October afternoon, the sky over Malta was as clear as crystal. Along the red dirt road leading out to the quiet countryside, Daphne Caruana Galizia's gray Peugeot quietly pulled away from her home. A few minutes later, an explosion shattered the air, shaking every window in the area. Blackened debris was flung across the fields. The woman who had dared to single-handedly expose Malta's most powerful tycoons and politicians had been killed by a bomb planted in her car. Her death was not only a crime, it was a declaration of war on press freedom across Europe. The lone woman, Daphne Caruana Galizia, was born in 1964 in Malta, a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean. She began her journalism career in the late 1980s when Malta was still a closed society where independent media had not yet truly developed. But over 3 decades, Daphne gradually became a source of dread for those in power. She investigated relentlessly, from public corruption, fuel smuggling, and money laundering to the Sicilian mafia and the murky ties between Maltese politicians and businessmen from Russia and Azerbaijan. Most notably, Daphne ran the blog Running Commentary, a personal news site that attracted hundreds of thousands of readers each day, surpassing even Malta's largest newspapers. With her sharp writing, she called out corrupt officials by name, published leaked documents, and exposed shocking scandals, including the Panama Papers in 2016, which rocked Malta's government. But it was precisely this uncompromising candor that made her a target. She received hundreds of threats, she was sued, her bank accounts were frozen, and ultimately she was murdered. On October 16, 2017, the sky over Malta was a cloudless, serene blue, as if no one could have imagined the horror about to unfold. That afternoon, Daphne Caruana Galizia was sitting in her home office in Bidnica, a quiet village surrounded by fields of red earth. She had just finished a new post on her blog, Running Commentary, an article exposing serious corruption allegations aimed squarely at Prime Minister Joseph Muscat and his closest associates. In the post, Daphne did not hesitate to call them crooks, and she ended with a chilling sentence that felt like a dark premonition. There are crooks everywhere you look now. The situation is desperate. At 2:58 p.m., Daphne left her desk, stepped outside, and opened the door of her silver gray Peugeot 108. She needed to go to the bank to handle some paperwork, something that should have been as ordinary as hundreds of days before. But this time, she didn't know that under the driver's seat, a timed bomb had been carefully planted, waiting for the exact moment she would start the engine. The car slowly rolled out of the front gate. Barely a minute later, as it reached a bend on the quiet country road, a deafening explosion erupted. The entire field shook. Locals nearby ran out in panic, seeing thick black smoke billowing high into the sky. Flames roared violently, consuming the Peugeot until it was nothing but a heap of twisted metal. Matthew, Daphne's son, heard the blast from inside the house. He sprinted outside, running frantically toward the scene, his heart pounding with dread. All he could see was the charred wreckage of the car, pieces of the bodywork flung dozens of meters away, the air heavy with the smell of fuel and burned flesh. There was no way to recognize the mother he loved. Within hours, Maltese police declared that this had been a targeted assassination using a remotely detonated explosive device. But to many citizens and Daphne's colleagues, it was not simply a murder. They called it outright an execution, a bloody message sent to anyone daring to expose corruption and power. The blast did more than end the life of a courageous journalist. It shook the conscience of all Malta, a tiny country once proud of its press freedom. The scorched fragments of that car became a symbol, a reminder to the world that wherever power casts its shadow, there are those willing to kill to protect it. Malta's political turmoil. Malta, the smallest country in the European Union, covering just over 300 square kilometers, had long worn the facade of a peaceful tourist paradise on the shores of the Mediterranean. But behind that dazzling curtain lay a darker reality, a lax financial system that had turned Malta into a hub for large scale international money laundering and tax evasion. And it was Daphne Caruana Galizia who dared to pull that curtain down. In 2010, when the Panama Papers were leaked, more than 11 million documents from the law firm Mossack Fonseca exposing how the world's powerful hid their wealth in tax havens. Daphne quickly gained access and sifted through the data relating to Malta. What she discovered stunned the entire country. Keith Schembri, chief of staff to Prime Minister Joseph Muscat, along with Energy Minister Conrad Mizzi, both secretly owned offshore companies in Panama. These companies were used to receive illicit payments from foreign businessmen, including funds from Azerbaijan. A complex network connected the Maltese government to transactions involving the sale of Maltese passports, the Golden Passport program for billionaires wanting to buy EU citizenship. Daphne published everything on her blog, running commentary. Each post was like a detonating bomb. She named officials outright, cited files, released leaked contracts. The public was outraged, but the government responded by denying and retaliating. Dozens of defamation lawsuits rained down on Daphne. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her family was bombarded with anonymous threats. In those most tense months, she was almost completely isolated. But Daphne never backed down. She kept digging, kept calling sources, kept writing tirelessly. In a conversation with friends, she once blurted out her deepest fear. They will kill me to shut me up. One day, they won't just sue me anymore. At the time, many thought she was exaggerating. Yes, Malta was corrupt, but it was still an EU member, a modern democracy. Who would dare murder a famous journalist? But Daphne understood better than anyone the danger of the forces she was confronting. And no one could have foreseen that her chilling premonition would come true just a year later, while the Panama Papers scandal was still smoldering. Her death was not merely the tragic end of an individual, but a shocking testament. Even in Europe, press freedom is not an invincible shield. The historic investigation, the death of Daphne Caruana Galizia, not only shook all of Malta, but also sounded an alarm across Europe. In the very first week, spontaneous protests erupted in front of the Maltese Prime Minister's office, with people holding up portraits of her bearing the words, "Who killed Daphne?" The European Union immediately intervened. The EU Commission sent a special envoy to Malta, demanding an independent and fully transparent investigation. Europol dispatched a team of bomb disposal experts, and the FBI was invited to assist in analyzing the detonation technology. International pressure mounted relentlessly on Malta's government, which was already accused of shielding corruption. Meanwhile, at the blast site, investigators sifted through every fragment of the charred Peugeot. Based on the signal transmission device, they determined that the bomb had been remotely detonated by a mobile phone. Communications data from the time of the explosion gradually revealed the trail of the perpetrators. On December 4th, 2017, less than 2 months after the murder, Maltese police carried out a coordinated raid on a harbor. They arrested 3 men, George DeGiorgio, Alfred DeGiorgio, his brother, Vince Muscat. These individuals all had criminal records for smuggling, extortion, and organized violence. Police allege that they were the ones who planted the bomb under the driver's seat and then triggered it when Daphne left her home. But even after apprehending the hitmen, the biggest question remained: who paid to have Daphne killed? Manuel Delia, a fellow investigative journalist and close collaborator of Daphne, did not believe this was a spontaneous crime. He insisted that only someone with both motive and power would dare to hire professional assassins to murder a famous journalist in the heart of the EU. For many months, the investigation seemed to stall, but then clues began to surface through wiretaps. Police uncovered a complex communication network leading to offshore accounts and mysterious flows of money. After nearly 2 years of gathering evidence, one name rose unmistakably to the top of the list of suspected masterminds: Jorgen Fenech, one of Malta's most prominent billionaires, owner of the energy company Electrogas and of the offshore firm 17 Black, a company Daphne had named directly in her investigations. On November 20, 2019, just before an official arrest warrant was issued, Fenech hastily boarded his private yacht, trying to flee to Sicily. But Maltese customs police intercepted him offshore. The image of the lavish yacht being escorted back to port, with the billionaire in a dark coat disembarking with an impassive face, became an iconic moment. For the first time, a tycoon from Malta's elite was facing accusations of orchestrating an assassination that had shaken Europe. But the story was far from over. Behind Fenech, many believe, there are still accomplices who have never been exposed. The prolonged trial. The arrest of Jorgen Fenech at the end of 2019 ignited hope for justice, for Daphne's family, and for all of Malta. The public believed that, at last, the true mastermind had been brought into the light, but the course of the trial quickly revealed that this would be a grueling and contentious legal battle. Immediately after being detained, Fenech hired a formidable legal team, including internationally renowned criminal defense experts. He denied all charges, insisting he was innocent, and accusing the Maltese government of trying to make him a scapegoat to placate international pressure. Meanwhile, the three men who carried out the killing, Vince Muscat and brothers George and Alfred DiGiorgio, were held pending trial. After months of interrogation, their lawyers began negotiating plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. In 2021, Vince Muscat was the first to decide to cooperate with prosecutors. He testified in detail about how the group was paid, how they planted the bomb, and how they waited for the signal from the phone to detonate it. In return, Muscat received a 15-year prison sentence, much lighter than the life sentence he originally faced. Muscat's plea deal triggered a wave of both outrage and relief among the public. On one hand, people were furious that Daphne's killer would serve only 15 years. On the other, his testimony significantly strengthened the case against Jorgen Fenech. At first, the DiGiorgio brothers stubbornly maintained their innocence, filing repeated appeals and delaying the trial. But after many closed-door negotiations, they eventually agreed to plead guilty in October 2022. In court, George and Alfred admitted they had been paid over 150,000 euros to carry out the assassination. Each was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Even so, their defense lawyers continued to hint that Fenech was not the only link. They alluded to more powerful figures who might have financed and protected the crime from behind the scenes. As for Fenech, since the day of his arrest, he has consistently denied playing any role as the mastermind. He insists he was merely a political donor and businessman, completely uninvolved in the plot to kill Daphne. Many times, Fenech's lawyers have claimed that the media and prosecutors have distorted the truth to pin the blame on him. The trial process has been repeatedly postponed due to procedural disputes, demands for more evidence, and enormous public scrutiny. Hundreds of news articles, independent investigations, and EU resolutions have turned this case into Malta's greatest test of the rule of law. As of 2024, the trial has still not concluded. Maltese society remains deeply divided. Some are convinced Fanek is unquestionably the mastermind. Others believe he has been turned into a scapegoat to shield higher ranking figures within the political system. Meanwhile, Daphne's family, especially her three sons, have continued their tireless campaign to keep the case from being buried in oblivion. They insist that until the full truth is revealed, justice will not be truly done. Aftershocks and legacy. The death of Daphne Caruana Galizia not only took the life of a courageous journalist, but left a wound that has never fully healed in Maltese society. Because even after she was murdered, her legacy continued to shake the foundations of the powerful. In the very first weeks after the assassination, Daphne's family found themselves in a bizarre and bitter predicament. Over 45 defamation lawsuits filed against Daphne by politicians, businessmen, and organizations while she was alive remained unresolved. Under Maltese law, these cases were automatically transferred to her heirs, meaning her husband and three sons had to go to court to defend their mother's reputation. They had no time to grieve. Even while the funeral was still fresh in their minds, they were forced to give interviews, file legal documents, and carry on the legal battles Daphne had left behind. Her eldest son, Matthew Caruana Galizia, decided to leave his job at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIG, where he had worked alongside his mother on the Panama Papers, to dedicate all his time to pursuing justice. He founded the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation with the mission of supporting investigative journalists worldwide by providing them with legal resources and security protection against the same threats his mother had faced. Matthew traveled across Europe speaking at forums, testifying before the European Parliament, and meeting with human rights organizations. In every speech, he always emphasized one point: my mother's death was not an accident. It was the direct result of a rotten system in which the powerful believe they have the right to kill anyone who gets in their way. International public pressure kept growing. Under the scrutiny of the European Union and dozens of press freedom organizations, in 2019, the Maltese government was finally forced to approve a public inquiry, the first of its kind in the nation's history. The inquiry lasted nearly 2 years, hearing testimony from Daphne's family, police, former government officials, and key witnesses. The final conclusion was published in a report over 400 pages long, delivering a shocking verdict. The state of Malta must bear responsibility. It was precisely the government's impotence, tolerance of corruption, and hostility toward the press that created a toxic environment that led to the death of Daphne Caruana Galizia. It was the first time the Maltese government indirectly admitted its own culpability. The prime minister at the time was forced to issue a public apology to her family on national television. But for many, that apology was not enough to erase the fear still hanging over Malta's journalists. In editorial columns, many writers stress that Daphne's sacrifice is a painful reminder. Freedom of expression is never permanently guaranteed. Her legacy, her uncompromising reporting, her steadfast spirit, and her defiant voice continues to inspire thousands of investigative reporters around the world, a voice that cannot be silenced. The death of Daphne Caruana Galizia was not the end of the story she began. On the contrary, it was like a great spark, igniting awareness of press freedom across Europe, a place where people once thought that such brutal violence to silence a journalist only happened in faraway countries. In Brussels, the capital of the European Union, Daphne's name was engraved on the memorial to murdered journalists alongside hundreds of other reporters who lost their lives simply for daring to expose the truth. On the day of the memorial ceremony, her loved ones, her husband and three sons, stood silently before the cold stone, gazing at the letters spelling out their mother's, their wife's name. The image of Daphne, a woman with brown hair, a resolute face, eyes both piercing and weary, became a symbol not only in Malta, but in newsrooms across Europe. In many places, her portrait now hangs on the wall as a quiet reminder the truth can be persecuted, but it cannot be killed. In one of her final posts on Running Commentary, Daphne wrote a sentence that has since been quoted by journalists more than any other. If I don't write, nobody will. And if nobody writes, everything will continue. That sentence, which at first sounds like a reproach, was in reality an expression of both loneliness and unshakable conviction. Over 30 years of reporting, Daphne was threatened, sued, slandered in state media, but she never stopped because she understood that silence was exactly what the powerful most desired. Daphne's death also sparked a movement to reform Maltese law, to change how journalists are protected, and to tighten controls over political corruption. The European Parliament passed a series of special resolutions demanding that Malta respect freedom of expression and establish funds to support investigative reporters. But above all, that tragic story posed a profound question to all of us living in the democracies we take such pride in. How alone can a journalist be when they dare to confront the darkness? And how indifferent can a civilized society become when it watches a voice silenced by violence and only bows its head? That is a question that to this day neither Malta nor Europe has fully answered. And perhaps it will echo again every time a reporter chooses to write the truth, no matter the price they will have to pay. A message: if the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia has moved you, please don't let it end as nothing more than a moment of sadness. Share this video, speak about her, say her name, because silence is exactly what those who killed Daphne desired most. A car bomb took the life of a courageous woman, but it could not take away the truth she dedicated her life to exposing. Every share, every retelling is a way for us to refuse to forget and to refuse to bow to violence. Please remember, freedom of expression does not exist by itself. It is sustained by the courage of people like Daphne, and it is our responsibility to keep that flame burning forever.